Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Dr. John Banter. I'm the Associate Director in the Office of Leadership and Community Engagement at Georgia Southern University. Today we are doing our leadership and crisis communication conversation, and we have with us Dr. John Egan and Dr. John Lester. And Dr. John Lester is the Vice President for University Communications and Marketing at Georgia Southern University. A communications veteran with more than 25 years of higher education communication experience, John was a newspaper reporter before moving into university communications. He edited the Alumni magazine and helped lead the News and Public Affairs office at the University of Florida before moving to Columbus State University, where he served as the chief of staff to the president and directed their university relations team. Also at Columbus State University, he taught media relations at the Command College and in the graduate program for the Department of Counseling, Foundations, and Leadership. He is a graduate of the University System of Georgia's Executive Leadership Institute and has a doctorate in public administration with a focus on higher education administration from Valdosta State University. Thank you, Dr. Lester, for joining us today.
My pleasure to be with you. Thanks for what you do for our students.
Yeah, we're absolutely thrilled to have you today. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first question. Would you share with us about the work you do for Georgia Southern?
Sure. So I lead a really talented team of communications and marketing and branding and advertising folks. So we manage everything from the marketing that we do to prospective students to support our enrollment efforts, to helping lead and direct our PR and communications efforts with media relations, news stories, answering questions from the media, crisis communications, and things like that. So a broad variety of issues. And then other duties as described, or other duties as assigned, which for me mostly means meetings.
Got it. Fun.
So Dr. Lester, how does your work for a public institution like Georgia Southern differ from what might be done in a private company or corporation?
That's a great question. Most of my career has been in higher education, but I think there's two biggest differences. Number one, in a university setting, in any governmental settings, we're ultimately responsible to the people. I mean, we're in fact spending their money. So we have both the responsibility, but a legal duty in terms of open records and things like that. So I think that the state entity, the public servant, the doing the public's good kind of function is one of them. And then number two is sort of the process. And in a lot of cases, that's the speed at which things are done. So in a private setting, especially in my background in a newspaper, you can move quickly and oftentimes unilaterally. In a public setting, and especially in a university setting, there are so many different constituents that feel that they have an ownership in what you're doing that it requires a lot of collaboration a lot of times.
So in times of crisis, what considerations do leaders need to think about and how they communicate with their stakeholders?
That could probably be a whole session.
I understand.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that come to mind when you think about communication during a crisis. Number one is transparency. You have to be letting your audiences know that you are letting them know as much as you can at that time. They have to have some faith in what they're receiving, that it's truthful, that it's honest, that it's as much of the story as they can get. But I think transparency is a key. And I think another key in a crisis situation is speed. And we could talk a lot about that because in today's day and age, that's sometimes very, very hard to manage because of the world in which we are in a communications setting. There's a lot of communications that being done on social media outside of our control. But speed of communications is important because there needs to be some authoritative voice in a crisis of what's happening, what is the bottom line, and then that dovetails into what I talked about before as far as transparency. You got to have a message that is trusted, that's being received.
Well, when you talk about speed, how quickly do you mean when you say speed?
Well, and I can talk about this situation that we're in now with the COVID-19 and give you an example. So when it first started hitting us and impacting the way the university operates, we were getting information down from the university system that we would push out to the university community as quickly as we got it. A lot of that just generated more questions. So we were in a situation, do we tell you what we know as quick as we know it, or do we wait and answer all the questions that we know were going to come up because of this one piece of communication? In the end, we erred on the side of, we're just going to give you everything we got and tell you we're still working on some of these other questions that we know are going to come up. How long are we going to be closed? How long are we going to be working from home? When are classes coming back? Those kind of things. We just didn't know the answer to those immediately. But as soon as we got some of the information down from the university system about how long we would be out and things like that, we went ahead and pushed that out immediately, knowing full well there were going to be questions that followed.
Yeah, that's interesting dynamics. I like that you're pulling in that piece that it's not just you operating in isolation. There's even an authority structure that leaders have to navigate as they manage these situations as well.
Sure, and I mean, again, putting it back to real-time scenario, the state of Georgia has a coronavirus task force. The chancellor of the University System of Georgia is on that task force. We are a member of the University System of Georgia. So the communication that we're doing to our audiences a lot of times are being shaped by what's happening at the highest level of state government. So there is sometimes a lack of freedom that we have that's probably appropriate on what we can say and do, because we're following what the directives are coming from the very highest levels of state government.
Sure, absolutely.
So, Dr. Lester, outside of our current situation with COVID-19, could you tell us about a time in your career in communications that's been marked by chaos or crisis? What suggestions would you have for leaders, and then how they can lead through such situations?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll give an example that was not from my time here at Georgia Southern, because there's been a few crises that if you want to get into here, we could talk about. But the one that springs most to mind is when we had a shooting on our campus when I was at Columbus State. And obviously that is a tragic situation, no matter which way you cut it. But we had a visitor on campus, and he was seen loading a gun, a handgun, as he was getting out of his vehicle in one of the student apartment complexes. So it was called into police. Police responded, ended up chasing him. He ran off campus and then ran back into campus, ultimately, and turned threateningly toward the officer and was shot and then later died. So that was
Wow.
rather chaotic and quite a crisis, both from the immediate aftermath of the incident and then through the rest of the week.
I can certainly see where some of the things you talked about with speed and transparency, that would certainly come into play with such a situation.
Absolutely. And that was this was several years ago. It was really one of the first instances I had where we really understood the power of social media. And the things that we were putting on social media were being taken by the media as official statements of the university because they were from the main university account. This was a situation where we had family members from the victim's family who hired an attorney immediately after the incident, started making accusations against the university that the officer or some of our policies were not being followed, or the officer had done wrongdoing. So again, we're back to the same issues I mentioned before about transparency and speed. So the speed of social media is something that we can never catch up with. I'm never going to try and outdo that, as much as it's frustrating. But as much as things get shared on social media, we have to try and find our lane for where we can put out our official statements and hope that we've established enough of credibility that it will be believed. So in that situation, we were in a situation where we had to let social media play out for a little while before we were able to come back out with enough information to justify, to the extent we could, what had happened. Just as a for instance, some of the accusations were that he was unarmed. So we were able to come back out with, well, here's the gun, here's a picture of the gun, here's a model of the gun, and here's how many bullets were still in the gun. So it's just a little bit of trying. It was a little bit of an example of trying not to catch up with social media, but being able to put out reliable, transparent information as quick as we could.
Dr. Lester, where have you seen great examples of communication from leaders during our current situation?
Well, I'd like to think that our president has done a fantastic job of leading, and a lot of your readers, your viewers might not be seeing that. But as soon as this pandemic hit, our president, Dr. Marrero, started meeting every single day with his leadership team and a few others, including the police chief, our emergency operations director, to make sure that we were coordinating our response. Every single day, and it's continued up until this week. Just this week, we started meeting every other day, just to check in every single morning to make sure that we were addressing concerns that we heard from students, especially, but making sure we were coordinated as far as the information that was happening, the responses that we were taking, and making sure the university was both addressing the issue at hand, but also continuing to move forward. We could talk a little bit, if you have time, about how that has been parlayed into the communication to our internal audiences. But I've been really impressed with the leadership of both him and my colleagues on this campus to address this situation as quickly as we can, but with our students in mind most.
Sure.
So to kind of close us out, because the audience that we have, they're looking for ways on how they can be invested in this process. But what suggestions do you have for Georgia Southern students and how they can provide leadership to help our institution and community in the days to come?
What a wonderful opportunity that you're giving our students. I think the only advice I would give them is to focus on the larger picture. Again, I'll give you just a for example. We refunded last week more than $11 million in student fees to 26,000 students or so. And as you might expect, we had a lot of complaints that it wasn't enough. But if you want to know where your students can lead, is have them understand the larger picture, have them understand the scope of transitioning a multi-million-dollar operation to online in the matter of days, to moving out 4,500 plus students in a matter of days, while also adhering to social distancing guidelines, while dealing with an unprecedented level of health advisories, by which we've never seen before. So for your students, I would say, keep your eye on the bigger prize. We are transitioning to online, but that does not mean that we are denigrating our academic offerings in any way. We're just doing them differently. It's new for us. It's new for them. So I would say keep your eye on the prize and keep your eye on the bigger picture. This is a learning opportunity for all of us, and it's how we respond to that is how we can learn and keep moving forward as leaders.
I appreciate that, Dr. Lester. Do you have any closing thoughts for our students and as we kind of leave this conversation for today?
I don't want to mess up anything that you guys have said who are experts, but I would encourage your students to understand the power that they have. I may have a title that sounds impressive, but a student who has the vision and some opportunity to sway others because of their logic and their respect, that carries a lot more weight sometimes than anything I can do.
Great. I appreciate your taking some time out of your busy day to join us for this conversation. And thank you for everything you're doing for Georgia Southern.
My pleasure. Thank you for what you do for our students. I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Be safe.